On July 21st, 2025, the Enugu Electricity Regulatory Commission issued a tariff order approving a new electricity tariff for MainPower Electricity Distribution Limited, reducing Band A rate from 209 naira per kilowatt hour to 160 naira kilowatt hours, effective August 1st. This move was met with a flurry of reactions from the National Regulator, NERC, DISCOs, other state regulators and stakeholders, as well as the federal government. They didn't just stop at issuing statements. Actions followed. Most notably, Enugu Electricity Distribution Company, following the implementation of the tariff order, reduced electricity supply to Enugu State market. And this move eventually strong-armed its subsidiary, MainPower, to revert to collecting old tariff, defying the state regulator. So we're going to get into what happens next and perhaps how the EERC, the state regulator, will respond to this defiance. We have joining us Lere Odusote. He's an energy and policy consultant and former commissioner, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, Lagos State. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yes, a pleasure. Now, we can't exactly say we didn't see or anticipate this coming. Some will say that, right? One of the immediate reactions from this tariff order from consumers was, can it be sustained? So are you surprised with how things have panned out?
Well, the answer would be yes and no. Did I expect MainPower and Enugu Disco, their parent company, to roll over and play dead? No, I didn't. But what I expected them to do was to follow the rules by petitioning to EERC to say, here is why I have a disagreement with you, rather than take the matters into their own hands or take laws into their own hands and simply curtail supply to Enugu State. That is sabotage. That's certainly not within their rights as a distribution company.
All right, and coming from, the reactions that we've seen, the different pictures have been painted. Obviously, a lot being lost in translation with regards to how EERC came about this tariff review and the implications for the federal government in terms of subsidy, the disco. So it does look like there's something being lost in translation. Is this that EERC is not clearly communicating, or is this a deliberate misunderstanding, on this issue?
Well, for most of the people who might be listening, and perhaps for yourself as well, let's understand exactly what the issues are, right? What was the expectation? What is going on now? And what should we be doing next? Now, if you recall, the Constitution Amendment, the fifth suite of Constitution Amendment, was passed in 2022. That clarified the responsibility of the National Assembly vis-a-vis the responsibility of the state houses of assembly. Now, hitherto, electricity had been a concurrent item on in the Constitution, meaning the states could make laws and the federal government could also make laws. Now, but given the doctrine of covering the field, once the federal government had made laws in a particular area, the state houses of assembly did not deem it fit to make a law that would be in conflict with a federal law. Now, what happened with the Constitution was they separated the responsibilities of the National Assembly and the state house of assembly. Thus, the National Assembly can make laws for generation and transmission. That's where it stops, right, in terms of their responsibilities, and also for cross-border and cross-boundary transactions of electricity. The state houses of assembly can make laws with respect to the generation, transmission, and distribution of energy within the confines of their states. What that means is that the National Assembly cannot make laws with respect to distribution of electricity at all. And it is the responsibility of the State House of Assembly. Now, the Electricity Act goes further to say that here are the prerequisites, that the state must pass a law, the state must also elect a regulatory commission, and the state must write to NERC to let them know that they're ready to take over regulation of electricity activities within their states. Now, there are very few people that you would ask that would tell you that the states are not better positioned to regulate distribution than the federal government, if you will. So we're where we need to be, where the states are, in accordance with the Constitution, regulating electricity distribution within the states. Now, how does a tariff get determined? There is a generation component of the tariff, There is a transmission component of the tariff. There is a distribution component of the tariff. There are also ancillary services, but those are rounding numbers, and those we would park mostly for now at the level of the federal government. So if you take the generation costs, the ancillary costs, the transmission costs, right? Those are costs that the State Regulatory Commission ordinarily does not have any control over and just accepts as long as it makes sense, at least as of today. But when it comes to distribution costs and marketing costs, those are fully within the ambit of the State Regulatory Commission. What happened in Enugu State was that the regulator took the costs from NERC tariffs, i.e. the federal government tariffs, and then accepted them, then took a look at the distribution costs, asked questions about it, sat down with MainPower to understand what those distribution costs are, and agreed on a number that would go into the tariff. What happened was that there was a significant reduction in distribution costs that went into the Enugu State tariffs, and that's what they passed on to MainPower, which is the distribution company that actually bills for electricity in Enugu State. What happened was MainPower looked at that number. They had sat down and they were not surprised. And if they say that they're surprised, that would not be honest. They were not surprised at the number. They then passed it on to EEDC, who is their parent company now. Ordinarily, EEDC should not be a parent company. It should be a sister company. But because of the way NERC has issued its delineation order, they've made it unclear. And so I would actually park the blame at the doorstep firmly of NERC, because NERC has decided to create confusion between the states and the federal government, and NERC needs to be called to order. What the Regulatory Commission did in Enugu was correct. They regulated the price of electricity at the distribution level and issued a tariff order. EEDC, which is a sister company, or should be the sister company of MainPower, didn't like the fact that their income was reducing, and they decided to curtail electricity supplies to Enugu State, which really is sabotage, and it should be treated as such. But again, I'm not going to preempt the process that's taking place.
Right.
MainPower has now submitted a petition to the Regulatory Commission, which will be considered, and there might be a public forum for them to address it.
But you have mentioned that NERC needs to be curtailed, and the next question would be how so, especially considering the fact that this Electricity Act that has granted the states this oversight, regulatory oversight over the discos, that act is now facing amendment, second reading in the National Assembly, and part of that, there's an element in that amendment that suggests or is pushing that NERC be given the power to regulate or to determine tariffs. What are your thoughts on this move? And also, how can NERC be curtailed in light of the Electricity Act 2023?
So let's take a look at it again, right? There are laws in Nigeria, right? But the laws all have to respect the Constitution. The Constitution is what is supreme. So if they want to go and change the Constitution, they can go and try and attempt to change the Constitution and then send it back to the states, and let's see if the states agree to that. But trying to pass a law that is not in accordance with the Constitution would be an invalid law, and again, that would further murky the waters. I really do not know what the drafters of the amendment intend to do. I don't know what their aim is. We'd have to take a look at it again and say, okay, so who is standing to benefit from this new amendment that they're passing, and why are they trying to do that? Which is, again, like I said, against the Constitution. It will not stand. It cannot. Because at the end of the day, the aim of the Constitution Amendment and the aim of the Electricity Act of 2023 was not to give powers to people to control things. The aim was to ensure that everybody played their part in ensuring universal access of electricity to all Nigerians. Now, this law did not just happen. There were lots of consultations that went on, starting from Lagos State and going across the country, for everybody to look at it and see what makes sense. What makes sense is for the states to manage the markets that are local to them, and for the federal government to manage the interstate transactions of electricity and also cross-boundary. So I'm not sure. The law that is being reviewed is not going to affect the Constitution, and therefore it's not going to affect the ability of states' regulatory commissions to determine the end-user tariffs of electricity, at least on the distribution side. NERC certainly cannot do that.
All right. Well, it'll be interesting to see how all this pans out. But with this stark defiance of their regulator, I think many are watching, different states are watching to see how everything pans out. What do you anticipate being the next, course of action for the EERC who have been defied by the DISCO?
So There are lots of things, and we can bring other discussions to play here, because at the end of the day, it will happen. So we have a company called MainPower that has its shareholders who are trying to preserve their revenue stream, if you will. And we have the Regulatory Commission, who today seems to be the only one that is looking after the needs of the consumers and making sure that they're not overburdened by companies who are regulated trying to over-recover. Because again, you're a regulated company, you have a concession, if you will, and the agreement is that you will run this concession and you will make these returns. If you then try to over-recover, it is the job of the regulator to look at this monopoly and say this monopoly is abusing its authority, if you will. And that's not right. Enugu Regulatory Commission has taken the bold step of saying this is what the understanding is, this is what the consumer should be charged. We think you're charging too much, you're over-recovering, and it's up to you to then come back after the first discussion to petition and say, oh, here are the things that you didn't consider in arriving at the tariff. That's the way to go. And I believe that MainPower has now submitted that petition, and I believe that EERC has 30 days to respond to that petition, and that's also going to be through a series of internal reviews, consultations, and also a public hearing. So that's where it's this going down. And again, it's an example for every other state, right, as to what you should and should not do. Your job as the distribution company is to ensure that you stay within the confines of the law and regulation and not try and take matters to your own hands. NERC also has to understand that by creating this parent company idea, rather than just sister company idea that was envisaged in the Electricity Act of 2023, they're creating problems. And that needs to stop.
All right, so we'll see exactly how that will be stopped. And finally, there are stakeholders who are calling for some sort of the establishment of a harmonization council that will set the baseline service standard and financial principles all states must follow. Do you see this as a viable solution? And what are the implications for decentralization efforts? And because of time, I'm squeezing in another question in there. Were the states ready, or are we really ready for this transition where there are things that were not put in place and that has led to the rift we are seeing now at the state level?
Well, here's the thing, right, that you have to know. The Electricity Act of 2023 was pushed primarily by the states. It wasn't a federal government initiative. It was pushed by the states under the auspices of the Nigerian Governors Forum. So yes, the states have all the support that they need to be able to create their own state markets. As you've seen in the Enugu example, the states also have the wherewithal to probe the distribution companies better than the NERC has been doing so far. You know, I don't want to be glib and say the wind has blown and we've seen the bottom of the chicken, but I think we'll let the petition process play itself out. And then my expectation is that all the other states are going to come to the table, understand what they need to do, review all of these cost buildups, and come up with tariffs that make sense for their states, basically tariffs that make sense for their consumers. Now, the Electricity Act also has a provision for a forum of electricity regulators, both NERC and the states. There's a forum that they're supposed to create and meet to harmonize the regulatory activities so that there are no shocks to the system and that electricity can continue to flow unhindered from one state to another as it has been doing.
All right. Thank you very much for your insights and perspective on this. We'll be tracking the developments. Like you said, the petition has been submitted, but perhaps we'll have you in again some other time as the story develops. Lere Odusote, former Commissioner for Energy, Lagos. Thank you.